Hey everybody, Argent here, and we're actually going to cover a serious topic again. I know it's crazy, it's been a little while, although I guess I put out two pretty serious topics. I did one on Trump and I did one on the dildo. I filmed a video about high versus low time preference today, so I'll put that out someday when I'm not doing a live stream or something. So just one little piece of business before we get into the actual stream. I will be going to Anime North next week on the Sunday, so that will be the 28th of May. So I will be there. I'll probably have Argent on my name tag. So if anyone wants to contact me, maybe we can meet up somewhere there if anyone else is going. I just figured I would mention that in passing. So, yeah. For those of you who don't live in Canada, it's a long weekend. And I managed to get my work done this week, so I could just basically chill this weekend. If I'm sounding a little more high energy than I have been, I slept like 12 hours last night. So yeah, feeling not bad, to be perfectly honest. We'll see. We'll see how many emergency on Sector 7 emails I get today. So, that being said, it is what it is. Nothing I can do, but I digress. So, just the last ESP live stream, a lot of people were kind of asking religious questions in the chat. So, I figured an Argent the Lispy Aristocrat says an Argent fan meetup would be cool. Yeah, problem is I live in Canada and a lot of people just live from all over the place. I've been to Anime North, I think like 7 or 8 times. I used to go every year in high school and every year in university. Just because I had a lot of more friends back then. Geez, that sounds pathetic. But yeah, we all used to go to Anime North together. And that kind of stopped happening because I became religious and I became right wing and I lost my friends. And there is someone I probably would. I guess on my current friends, most of them just wouldn't be caught dead at such a thing. It's just not really their interest. And my friend who would go with me is just staying the summer in Ottawa. So yeah, that's what that's about. But it's always pretty fun at Anime North. I'm not cosplaying or anything, but there's this huge room. Kind of the key attraction is the dealer room where you get people from all over North America who come. And they sell all kinds of Japanese imported stuff. There's a lot of artists. There's a whole room full of artists who are selling original artwork at a pretty cheap cost. So that's pretty neat. Yeah, it's cool. They have like panels. They'll often kind of have like famous people there. There's viewing rooms where they kind of have rare stuff. It's just kind of a lot of fun. But yeah, so that's kind of Anime North. So yeah, a lot of people have been asking me religious questions lately, so I figured I should address some of them. So I guess the biggest one I get is, Argent, how can you be a race realist and be Christian? Which is a good question, to be perfectly honest. I guess for me, they just kind of went together naturally. I became kind of religious and a race realist at the same time. And I guess kind of how they mutually justify one another is, I guess there's kind of the old school one, which is God pretty clearly in the Old Testament rejected the idea that everyone was that you were supposed to have one world government, that you were supposed to have this one massive multicultural society. I mean, to a certain extent, that's what Babel was about, was humanity thought that they could do better than God, because God had put different peoples all over the world, and they attempted to kind of merge them all together in this multicultural utopia, and to build, I guess you could see the Tower of Babel for any sort of attempt to usurp God's authority. So God kind of put a stop to that, and he rescattered the people, and he sent them to different parts of the world and changed their language. There's that aspect. I think if when God was creating the world, and I'm not a young Earth creationist, I just mean the way things wound up, I think he wouldn't have had it so that we would wind up as separate races and separate cultures if that was not what he intended. So I guess at a very basic level, that's kind of part of it. So there's that. There's also, and the list of the aristocrat points this out, he creates differences in people so differences can be celebrated. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the irony of multiculturalism is they're like, oh, I'm so tall. I love this African stuff. I love this Japanese stuff. I love this stuff from all over the world. And because I like the uniqueness of these different societies, what I want to do is I want to bring it all together in one place and blend them together into kind of this generic world culture that has no character. So yeah, it's if you've ever seen those the meme, it's like there's like a bunch of different colors or different flags or whatever, and it goes nationalism, and then there's just this like brown paint and it goes multiculturalism, and that's true. So yeah, as kind of a Christian, I am concerned for the general welfare of humanity. And that's part of why I support basically nationalism. Using nationalism as just basically a stand-in term for identitarianism. Basically that in general, people should try to preserve their ethnic group and their culture. And then that's a inherently good thing so long as that does not violate the natural law. And, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a minute. Preserve their people and their culture so long as it does not. Yeah, and why I support this is for no other reason. I think it makes people happier. People aren't happy in multicultural societies. You can see this. All people really do in our society is just complain. They complain about oppression. They complain that their feelings are hurt. They complain that they feel alienated. They turn to just really like drugs. They turn to sex and just indulgence to try to kind of fill the hole in their soul that's created by multiculturalism. Putnam did it, and I have to read the full study, but he did a study called Bowling Alone, where he basically did a study and he found that the more diverse an area is, the less social capital there was, the more isolated people were. Diversity breeds lower social trust. It breeds... the more diverse a neighborhood, the less kind of community things happen. The less people know their neighbors, as it were, and the less of kind of a support network people have. Bowling Alone was kind of the thesis was... when he looked into it, he found as American society had changed and become more multicultural, more diverse, more things like bowling clubs, things like community organizations, charity organizations, have just kind of continually been in a decline. And that was kind of one of the things that made America so great, was it had more civic associations than almost the rest of the world combined. There was the Brotherhood, the Sister, as Des Bragg would say, the Brotherhood, the Sisterhood, the Free Loan Society. You have all you had all these civic associations, and a lot of that is just kind of collapsing and disappearing, and this is kind of happening throughout the Western world, where once there was kind of this sense of purpose and unity, now there's just atomized individuals who are depressed, who don't feel welcome and have this sense of fear. It also, I think, lowers social trust. Part of what made the welfare state work as well as it did in kind of Northern Europe was there was a lot of social trust and there was a lot of homogeneity. If the people... you tend to empathize better with people who are like you. And if your neighbors are like you and the people around you are like you and you have kind of a shared values, a shared identity, and kind of a shared kinship with them, then you tend to trust them more, and you're in general less likely to kind of abuse the system, at least in societies where the genetics of the people are higher trust in general. In some societies, the people's genetics are just super low trust. But yeah. So what was I thinking about? So yeah, it kind of functioned as well as it did. And once you get all these like Somalis and other people coming in, they have no connection to the blood and soil of like Sweden. They have no real stake in the country. They have no real skin in the game. It's not their people. It's not their culture. It's not their history. So they don't feel any shame in leeching off and kind of destroying what's there. So yeah, I think that's just kind of something important to keep in mind when we talk about this. There's also the issue of, okay, well, people say, well, out of Christian charity, we have to do stuff like let the refugees in. But it's Christian charity for who? Is it Christian charity for the refugees? Is it Christian charity for the people who live there? I mean, is it Christian charity to let in a bunch of rapists, criminals, and thugs who are going to, like, rape your children? I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, in a lot of these cases, these people are like, oh, we have to be compassionate. We have to let these people in. But at the same time, these people are like raping their children. So yeah, these are all things you have to keep in mind. I think what's important to think about is the church has no particular insight into practical government. They just don't. They don't understand economics. They don't understand politics, really. They don't understand demographics. They have a lot of good... what would be the term? I was trying to think of it. Yeah, they just don't have any particular insight into any of these things. And I think you can take a lot of moral direction from them, and they do have a lot of ideas on organizing a society, but you have to understand they're men of God. They're not social scientists. They're not biologists. They're not economists. And that's, I think, part of the problem with Pope Francis is kind of traditionally what Catholic social teaching was about kind of mixing Christian principles with what worked practically. And I think that's one of the things a lot of people have a lot of respect for John Paul II for, was he kind of mixed them. Like he would say, yes, capitalism works so far as a market economy, private property works. There's a lot of good things capitalism has created, but capitalism has to be mixed with respect for the individual, a focus on the family, and a view of the inherent dignity of the individual, not just as a unit of value. So I remember what John Paul II said was, he would say, if by capitalism we mean a market economy, a free economy, an economy where people can sell their labor. I'll answer your question in 1 second, Grismo. I'm just finishing this point. If you're talking about that kind of thing, then yeah, that's perfectly compatible with Christianity. But if we're talking about a society where the only purpose of society is to make money, and there's no value placed on the family or the well-being of the individual, and all that matters is money, then no, that's wrong. So he's like, capitalism as an economic system has a lot of good aspects. Capitalism kind of as a political system is very dangerous. So I think traditionally there has been more of kind of a mixture of what is possible and what is kind of ideal, and that's just kind of the way the world works. And to a certain extent, secularism is traditional. There's always been separation between church and state, to a certain extent. They're complementary. They're right and left lung. If you ever see the two-headed eagle, the one head of the eagle is church, and the other head of the eagle is state. They're both kind of part of one body, but they both serve different purposes. The church is supposed to kind of stand as the moral and spiritual foundation, but oftentimes the state and kind of temporal power will have to do immoral things, will have to do things that are not ideal in order to preserve to do what's best for the people. So you kind of have this balance, and there is a tension there, and there is kind of an eternal tension between heaven and earth. But that makes for a good society. And I think the issue with Pope Francis is he doesn't understand that there's a balance there. But anyway, so Grismo asks, Argent, do you believe in salvation is through works or faith alone? I forget what how it's worded exactly. I'd say it's through both. I mean, let me try to, and this is just kind of my personal opinion on it, which I kind of wrapped together from a bunch of things. In kind of Catholicism and more so even in Orthodoxy, we have this view that the ultimate purpose of humanity is to become infinitely more like God. An early saint, I forget who it was, someone will probably type in the chat, said, God became man so man could become God in a lowercase g. God just meaning any kind of transcendent immortal being that has unimaginable powers. So to a certain extent, the saints are gods, the angels are gods with the lowercase g. They are not the divine transcendent creator. And so the passage to become more like God is infinite because God is infinite. And so in Catholicism, we call it divinization, whereas the human is made divine. And in Orthodoxy, they call it theosis, whereas the human becomes more like God. So I think that salvation and this process and kind of the nature of humanity to be able to achieve this through baptism and the sacraments is a free gift. But at the same time, we are granted... how to describe it? We have to actively pursue this by participating in the sacraments. I have a very kind of Neo-Platonic view of the world, which is compatible with Christianity. I know someone who I think has a degree in theology who describes Neo-Platonism as the greatest non-Christian worldview. And in a lot of cases, most early Christian philosophers didn't see Platonism or Aristotelianism or Neoplatonism as incompatible with Christianity. Like the Logos was a pre-existing concept in Platonism and Neoplatonism, and that was the reason why Paul used it, because it was something that it was similar to an idea that the Greeks already had, and it was the idea of the one single creator God. They didn't necessarily believe he was personal, but Plato and Aristotle both posited it. It was hardly a unique idea when we kind of get into it. So kind of one of the ideas of Platonism is at the center of everything is the one. It is the divine. It can be a being, kind of like it can be a creator God. It can just be a impersonal substance. But there is this perfect thing at the center of all existence, and everything is an emanation from it. And some of the things are closer to the one than other things. For instance, and this is kind of where we get into Platonism, things are kind of greater and lesser versions of themselves. Like a broken chair is less perfect and less close to the one than a working chair. And you kind of have this great shells of being, whereas there are things that are more and less perfect. And kind of the idea combining that with Christianity is you grow closer to the one. You become more and more pure, and you become more of... You just kind of ascend this kind of stairway of sorts. And yeah, so I think that's kind of what I wanted to... Yeah, so hopefully that kind of makes sense. So I think salvation is offered as a free gift through faith and through the sacraments, but humans also have, through their agency, the need to partake in it through works, I guess you could say, in order to become greater and better beings, as it were. So Grismo asks, why do Catholics have to confess to priests to forgive them of their sins? Shouldn't God be able to forgive a sin instead of a man? Well, God can forgive sins. The reason that confession was put into place was to have a reliable way to to seek redemption. Because if you're just kind of praying to God, you don't know if you meet the conditions to be forgiven or not. So the idea behind things like most of the sacraments, like confirmation, baptism, etc., is obviously God is not bound by the sacraments. If he wants to basically say, oh, this person is the equivalent of being baptized, he can do that. He's not bound by it. But what God left us is he said, well, we can't just have people need guidance. They need structure. They need a way to know for sure. So what he did was through Christ, his incarnation, and through the apostles, he gave us things like confession. So you can go to a priest, and the priest, using his sacrament of holy orders, is able to absolve you. And as I said, if you can confess to God and he can absolve you, but if you go to a priest, then you know for certain that you're absolved. There's also just other aspects of this. There's a reason why people go to therapy. Why it feels good to talk about things to people. Why if you do something bad and you talk to your parents or you trust, you feel better about it and you can work through the issues. Part of the purpose, a main purpose of the church is to guide people. Like when I go to confession, the priest normally will provide me some advice. I mean, it's less so in kind of modern days, but he'll be like, here's some things that you can do. This isn't actually a sin. You're just feeling irrationally guilty about it. Let this go, that kind of thing. And it's part of a kind of a holistic process meant to not only provide kind of divine grace to the individual, but also to provide guidance. So yeah, I think that is hopefully that kind of answers the question as to why it's in place. It's important, especially in kind of Catholicism. Anyone else getting stream issues? That's sad. It sucks. Internet in Canada is not particularly reliable. Let me see if I can turn this down. Sometimes I get sometimes OBS will turn itself back up even after I lower the bitrate. Okay, there we go. I lowered the bitrate by like 20%, so hopefully that should resolve it and make it a bit better. Let's see here. I'll reduce the size of the window a bit, and hopefully that'll help. Okay, so I reduced the bitrate and I reduced the size of that, so... what was I thinking about again? So I was being asked about determinism versus free will. So that's a good question. It's something I've been meaning to talk about for a while. So here's the issue of kind of determinism versus free will. I think it's kind of a false dichotomy. And let's just kind of talk about this a bit, because it's kind of a complicated topic. So in general, within the whole determinism versus free will thing, there's 4 different positions. There's 2 axes and 4 positions. There's, does free will exist? Yes or no. Does determinism exist? Yes or no. So people who reject determinism but embrace free will take the libertarian position. So in the libertarian position, there's no determinism, but people have free will. There is the person who rejects both determinism and free will, who takes the how would you describe it? The indeterminist position. Indeterminism is a position that everything is just random and there's no rhyme or reason to the universe. It's a very scary position if you really think about it. There's compatibilism, which affirms both determinism and free will. And then there's hard determinism, which says there's no free will, but there is determinism. So those are kind of the 4 fundamental positions you have. and there's kind of a debate between the variety of them. Now, my personal position is what's called agent causation. And agent causation is traditionally kind of considered to be a form of libertarian free will. It was first created by Aristotle, and basically what agent causation says is free will is not so much. Okay, just let's talk about free will for a minute before we get into that. Free will. What does it mean to be free? A lot of people would say the freedom to choose otherwise. But the freedom to choose otherwise is kind of a misnomer, because what does that really mean? Like, you don't kill somebody, like there's some random child in front of you, and you're free to also kill the child, but you choose not to kill the child. I mean, it's kind of irrelevant to a large extent. What you're going to do in a situation is determined by past experiences, determined by your personality, etc. And if you were just to say, like, nothing, because some versions of the free will is you're able to act without other things determining your actions. But that would just mean your actions are random. So is free will that they're not predetermined and you just act in a completely random fashion? I mean, that's not a very satisfying answer to the question. Okay, I'm free, but I'm free to act completely randomly, and there's really not a lot there's no kind of locus of the self that my actions come from. So you kind of have this problem where you can accept that there are things that necessitate actions. Yeah, that there are things that necessitate certain actions. You can also take the perspective that free will just means what you do is just random, and that there's nothing that influences it, which kind of makes the concept of free will largely meaningless, because it would just be every person, there's nothing that really determines why one person acts one way and why another person acts another way. So, kind of how I view free will is not has nothing really to do with whether or not something influences or determines your actions. It's based on whether or not the actions come from a chain or it's a generator of a causal chain. One second, I just have to grab one thing and then I'll just finish this. Okay, there we go. So, yeah, so I think that there are kind of two things in existence. There's things that are actions in and of themselves, things that can generate actions, and things that are part of a causal chain. So, kind of the classic example of this that was given by Aristotle is the rock is moved by the stick, which is moved by the man, by a hand which is moved by the man. So because humans have intentionality and will and can make decisions and have consciousness, they are the beginning of a causal chain, much like God is the beginning of a causal chain. So what means that humans kind of have free will means that they are able to create causal change in and of themselves. So it doesn't matter really what necessitates the decisions that people make. What kind of matters is whether or not it's sentient and whether or not you have intentionality. So I guess that's kind of my answer to it, because in truth you aren't really free to act, because if you were completely free to act, then your actions would be random. People generally act the way they do because of who they are as a person. And they probably couldn't do something else, and it's probably a good thing that they couldn't do something else because it's the basis of their identity. So I hope that kind of makes sense. That's kind of my take on the problem of free will. Why do you call the priest father and make them dress in a goofy outfit? I'm not really... I forget the exact reason, but my guess would be that it's because the priest is a direct conduit to God. When you undergo the sacrament of holy orders, it permanently changes the nature of your soul, and it allows priests to serve in a unique fashion as an intermediary between God and man. And my understanding is you call him that because he takes on the kind of the role of father. Let's see here. So someone's asking about the veneration of the saints. So, I think that's something a lot of people don't really understand. I don't think there's anyone who gives the saints as a position similar or close to God. What we kind of view the saints as is they're, to a certain extent, intermediaries, because God is a very difficult figure, I guess, to kind of relate to, which is part of the reason that he incarnated himself as a man. Like if you get into like abstract concepts like the deistic God or the demiurge or etc., then there's no real way to directly know God. So the saints kind of serve as an intermediary between us and him. There's also kind of the issue of, at a basic level, when we pray to the saints, we're asking them to pray for us. Because the saints sit next to God's throne. They're in heaven and they can talk to him directly. So that's kind of the basis of it. As to why we have such a high view of the Virgin Mary, well, she bore God. She's God's mother. And men love their mothers. I think it's Archbishop Fulton Sheen did a big lecture on it. Let me just have the agency to find it. Let's see here. And he was talking about an artist, I believe his name was Whistler, who painted this beautiful painting of his mother. And they're like, how did you paint such a beautiful painting of the mother? And he's like, men tend to view their mother in the best terms possible. So in Christ, you have this figure who, like all men, loves his mother. But in kind of a unique twist, he was able to create her, since he had an idea of what she would be like since the beginning of the universe. So we venerate her so highly because she's God's mom. That's pretty much the long and the short of it. There's also another issue is Christ is the final king, the eternal king of Israel. And in ancient Israel, how it worked was the queen of Israel was not the wife of the king. The queen of Israel was the mother of the king. So Mary is the queen of heaven because she's Jesus's mom. So that's kind of the very short reason of it, of kind of the logic behind it. But yeah, I like the Fulton Sheen. He does a good explanation of the whole thing. But no, that's a very, very old devotion. There's images of the Virgin Mary coming from really far back. I forget how old the oldest one was. There was one that was rumored to be by St. Luke, which who knows if that's true or not, but I think that was lost during the sack of Constantinople when the Turks burnt a lot of stuff. A lot of the really, really old and valuable relics were lost when the Turks burned Constantinople. Because of where it was, because it was kind of in the beginning of the Middle East, and it was kind of the world's largest Christian city, a lot of the really ancient stuff was there, but like I said, the Turks blew it up. What are your thoughts on Pastor Steve A. Anderson? I have no idea who that is. If a judge calls, if a lawyer calls a judge your honor, or some limey calls MP your worship, or whatever, are they committing idolatry? No, because I think those words have other meanings that come from a long ways back. Like awesome has a completely different meaning than how it historically used to. Sometimes words just evolve over time. And worship now is in a much less, in a much more limited context than it used to be. Let's see here. Someone was asking me whether or not criminals should be let off the hook if they are legitimately repentant. Well, I don't know if there's a way to tell whether they're legitimately repentant or not. It's a very difficult... It's a very difficult issue to... completely lost my train. It's very difficult. Like, how can you tell someone's repentant? How do you know if someone's not... is not faking it? I mean, you can forgive people's crimes on a moral level, but I think the state has a responsibility and a duty to punish crime, regardless of whether or not the person has been forgiven or not. There is a responsibility of the state for, because there's a variety of parts of crime, reasons for punishing crime. There's crime is punished because it there has to be retribution against evil. There has to be a deterrence against future crime. There's often an aspect of rehabilitation, and there's also just people need to have confidence that they live in a just society. So you have all these other aspects. So even if the person is completely repentant as to themselves, then I think the state still has a duty to punish them, to set an example for other people, and to give the appearance of justice. So it's interesting because traditionally the death penalty was seen as a good thing, as being very just, because if you know the exact time and date of your death, then you'll have a priest who you can confess to right before you die, and you're almost guaranteed to die in a state of grace. So it was traditionally seen as being a very compassionate punishment, which I guess is kind of interesting. It's hard for us to understand in modern terms, but that's kind of traditionally how it was thought of. Thoughts on atheists that live a good life based on karma and not the Bible? Well, I guess first off, I don't think it's ever been doubted that people can live in accordance with the natural law without being Christian. I mean, that's something that exists. It just people naturally follow. It's called the natural law. There is a universal moral order that people follow to a greater or lesser extent. It doesn't matter whether or not they've ever read the Bible. And that was kind of one of the things that First Vatican declared, is the First Vatican Council declared that God was knowable through reason alone. Monotheism was frequently developed in various philosophical systems. Just like to a large extent, natural law can often develop through reason alone. Certain aspects of societies just tend to work better. The nuclear family almost always works better. And yeah, that's just something that kind of develops. Now, people are talking about Christmas in the chat. So just briefly to address the issue of Christmas. So the reason why Christmas is on the day it's on is that the tradition in ancient Israel was that prophets are conceived on the same day that they die. So Christmas is 9 months after Easter. So the idea was that Jesus was conceived on Easter and was born on December 25th because it's roughly 8 months afterwards. Also, it's the date issue is kind of something you have to keep in mind is they used a different calendar back then, so it's actually on a different day, which is why Orthodox Christmas is kind of on what used to be December 25th. So that is the general reasoning behind it. It was something mentioned very far back in the day. So let's see here. Should charismatic Catholicism be permitted? No, it should not be permitted. I honestly think charismatics, when they speak in tongues, are at best just kind of delusional and crazy, and at worst they're being possessed by demons. They're really weird. They have no place in the church. I just find them super creepy, to be perfectly honest. I don't really understand the need for it. Let's see here. A lot of conversations about Buddhism. Buddhism, I don't know. I don't really get why people are so enamored by it. It has a couple of nice, I guess, kind of platitudes in it. It's not really very much of... It's like, if you actually get into it, it gets really weird, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it depends what form of Buddhism we're talking about. I mean, I guess Theravada Buddhism is slightly less of a religion than Mahayana Buddhism. But if you get into Mahayana Buddhism, it's like any other Eastern religion. It's really, really weird. Like, people like to LARP with Hinduism, but Hinduism has a lot of degeneracy in it. Like, a common thing for Shiva is they have the Shiva Linga, which is a statue representing Shiva's penis, and they pour milk over it to be like a metaphor for what's it called again? For Shiva's reproductive abilities. And if you read like the Mahabharata, there's like dick girls in it, there's transsexualism, there's polyamory, there's all kinds of weird shit in Hinduism. And a lot of that translates over into Buddhism. We just see a very watered down, kind of like rationalized, westernized version of Buddhism that's taken in a lot of kind of developments in analytic philosophy and borrowed a lot of terminology and I guess kind of moral stuff from what is it? From Christianity to kind of seem more like it. And it's kind of, I think, meant to look a lot more like Christianity than actual Buddhism is like. It's really weird. It's funny because I actually have a friend who hates Hinduism a lot more than Islam. And there's a variety of reasons for that. His main reason is he just sees the Hindus as being a filthy people. And he means that, like, literally. India is an absolutely disgusting country. India is probably the most disgusting place on earth. I have to do a video about it. What was it again? What was it that India said again? Yeah, it's just gross. Have you seen the Canadian Theravada Buddhist has about 50,000 subs? No, I haven't actually. That sounds kind of interesting though, but yeah, like so part of his reason why he thinks Islam is better is Muslims are just cleaner. Their religion necessitates a certain degree of ritual cleanness that you don't see in Hinduism. In Eastern philosophies, there's a tendency to get so disinterested in the world and to get so divorced from it that you just don't care about the real world anymore. You cease to care about people. And that's kind of part of the reason why India is like the way it is they think the material world is an illusion. They think that Many Muslims I've seen are filthy. They are, but they're not as bad as Hindus. It's not possible to be as bad as Hindus. Most African countries aren't as bad as them. African countries don't have designated shitting streets in a lot of cases. So what was I thinking about again? Yeah, so... But he tends to prefer that. But no, Hinduism's fucking weird. In a lot of cases, once again, you have to understand the version of these things we see is either the very, very pure version that you get from reading the religious texts or talking to, like, Brahmin philosophers. Or what was the other thing? Or like a westernized version that was made by someone who was trying to rationalize it and develop a coherent theology. So someone's asking, is this RuneScape? No, this is the Old Republic. But no, Eastern religions are really weird. That's not to say there's not some interesting or good ideas in them, but I think you have to understand that someone says designated shitting street, really. Yes, if you look it up, India has by far the highest rate of defecation in the open on Earth. It's something like 40 or 50% of the population prefers to defecate in the open as opposed to using a toilet. People in India, even in like office buildings, I've heard this from actual Indians, not from like white nationalists or anything. But they'll say, like, people will wipe their asses with their hands and not wash them in office buildings. There's just piss and shit everywhere. It's just an utterly disgusting country. People who go there who aren't from India normally get violently ill in the first couple days. There's not a functional sewer system. If you see it, I think it's, Slumdog Millionaire. There's just, like, this giant hole full of shit in the middle of the city. They are just a disgusting people. And one of the attempts to deal with it is they have the designated shitting streets. So there's like streets you can go into and just shit on the ground. And a frequent problem is India has one of the highest rape rates on Earth. And what often happens is when women are street shitting, someone will come up behind them and rape them. And that's not even like a white nationalist saying that. That is like how Indians will describe their country. Some of the better ones have enough shame to be disgusted by it and to like feel bad about it, but that's just kind of the state of things. And I'm not saying all Indians are bad or that we can't work with them at certain points, but I think people often will get under these illusions, like that Russia is some morally perfect country or that Indians are like bro tier, when they have all kinds of just shit like that. India is just, ugh. So yeah, like I said, one of my friends just hates them a lot more than he hates Muslims because of the way it is. Someone mentioned Sikhs. Sikhs aren't as bad, but it's the same thing. We've said when he was in India, the smog of pollution made his skin gag. Yeah, so the thing on Russia is I posted this picture on Facebook where I showed a chart of abortion rates throughout Europe. So so Russia has by far the highest abortion rate in Europe. Like, other countries aren't even close. Let me just find where I put this. Russia also has the highest divorce rate in Europe, and it has the highest rape rate of any country aside from Thailand outside of Africa. The AIDS rate is really high. If you count all of Europe, Russia has 2/3 of the new AIDS cases in Europe. And Russia's not, like, I don't even think it's 1/3 of Europe's population, to be perfectly honest. Let me see here. Where did I put that? Okay, so in Russia, something like 70 to 90% of pregnancies end in abortion. Just think about that for a second. It's the main form of birth control. They don't really use contraception in there. They just, yeah. Let's see here. In the Ukraine, it's even higher, I think, than in Russia proper. In the Ukraine, Romania, and Russia, it's something like I said, 80 to 90% of pregnancies end in abortion. In Ireland, for comparison, it's about 5 to 7%. In Poland, it's less than 1%. In Austria, it's about 2%. In Portugal, it's 1%. In Sweden, it's about 15%. So you have like the most liberal countries on earth. In Holland, it's 5%. So just keep that in mind. Russia's abortion rate is something like, what is that like? 5 versus 80. Don't worry, I'm a professional. Like 20 times higher in Russia than it is in Western Europe. So yeah, it's just something to keep in mind, because people are like, there's a lot of like Slavophiles. Like I've started to see a lot of people idealizing communism, like Nazbol and that kind of thing. But Eastern Europe has all these messed up ideas of their own. But Super 360 says he's 25% Beaner, but still a white nationalist. I mean, if you're 25% Beaner, you're probably more than 75% white, because there's very few pure Indios left. So, I mean, under the Spanish system, people who were less than 25% Indios were just white. So, I don't know. I'm not a puritanical. Let's see here. Someone says, so Catholic Eastern European countries are the place to go. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to make a point here. That it's, I don't know. I think people can go a bit far into the black pill and go, all hope is lost, we're the worst society in history, Eastern Europe is based. I mean, Eastern Europe is less tolerant of homosexuality and immigration than a lot of places on Earth, but there's a lot of really shitty things in Eastern Europe. Sex slavery is very common. Yeah. Let's see here. Later Gator says he met another base Jew who described the settlers as more white and the most base Jews. Let's see here. What else was I looking at? So that is... Russia has a very, very high rate of, AIDS, child abuse, other stuff like that. There's the white Sharia meme, too, which is just really dumb. I mean, it's a funny meme, but if people are unironically in favor of it. Oh, by the way, we have a great Richard Spencer quote. Richard Spencer has become a Holodomor denialist. He says it was done because of poor planning, but there was no deliberate genocide. The Holodomor was not a genocide. It's just something that they that identity politics in Ukraine and Poland are trying to milk for all it's worth. It's something that actually really disgusts me is how people attack I completely lost my train of thought. What was I talking about again? Right, okay, sorry. What irritates me is people who attack the Poles for being anti-Russian. So they're like, the Poles are cucks. Because the kind of the right-wing party that's in power now in Poland, the Based Law and Justice Party, is really anti-Russian and really pro-American. So when they came to power, a lot of people called them cucks because they were really pro-NATO, they were really pro-American, they really hated Putin. And they're like, these people are cucks, despite the fact that the Law and Justice Party is really based. They said we're taking no migrants. They further restricted abortion. They had like a ceremony where they declared Jesus to be the King of Poland, which is based. So despite the fact that they're actually pretty edgy, a lot of people called them cucks just for being anti-Russia. And I mean, if you're Polish, why wouldn't you be anti-Russia? Russia's raped your country so many times in the past that, yeah, I mean, isn't that kind of natural? If you're Ukrainian, then there's lots of reasons for you being anti-Russian. They treated you like shit. So I think it's like really unfair to tell these people that they're cocks, to tell these people that they're losers or they're bad for disliking a people who have every reason to, yeah, like I said, be afraid of these people. Anyways, but yeah, it's this whole communism thing is just like, why do we have to do it? Why do we have to try to redeem Stalin and communism? It doesn't make any sense, because these people claim to like Hitler, but Hitler was an anti-communist. I mean, that was the thing pretty much all fascist movements had in common, was that they despised communism. So I guess just kind of my position on Hitler, and I've said this in the past, is I just think, regardless of whether or not how you feel about him, what was I thinking about again? I'm trying to remember what I was thinking of. I completely lost my train of thought there. Yeah, I don't know if anyone, just briefly about the whole TRS thing, I don't know if anyone follows them on, is like in that community at all on Facebook. I'm not, but I have a lot of people who are friends with them, and I know Rainey. And basically, Seventh Son went completely crazy in one of his posts, and he did this big post like screaming about how he wanted to fight at 40 and Rainey. Like, it's bizarre. They're just like, he's like, I'm gonna come across the continent and I'm gonna fight you one-on-one like a man, etc. And it's devolved into like all this kind of paranoia stuff. But yeah. Matt 40 ruins everything. But yeah, so another thing that's kind of happened with TRS is thoughts on Milo. I just have never really looked into Milo much. I think there's some likable things about Milo. Milo has always struck me as someone who's like not an awful person, but is just really fucked up and needs help. Like, I do think he has a soul. I think a lot of people in these spheres are just kind of soulless sociopaths who are looking for a reason to hate people. I think is kind of how I feel about a lot of people in these circles. I don't think Milo's like that. I think Milo just has really deep issues that he needs help on. He's not like an unlikable person, though. What's worse for society, transsexuality or homosexuality? Probably homosexuality, just because trannies creep people out too much. Like, people just naturally are so averse to them. What was I thinking of? But yeah, just back to TRS for a minute. It's really degenerated into... It's really degenerated into a lot of paranoia. Like, there's a lot of people who... They think everyone's doxing each other now. It's just kind of a mess at the moment. Like, but as I've said in the past, I don't have anything to do with TRS. I haven't watched The Daily Show in, like, 2 or 3 years at this point in time. But yeah, and I don't really want to have anything to do with them, just because there's just a lot of like shady stuff that goes on. Like, I kind of feel if I was involved in that community, it would just make me a target, to be perfectly honest. Super 360 says, is TRS still funny? I only listened to their episode bashing libertarians and it was amazing. Yeah, what kind of happened with The Daily Show is for the first, like, I don't know, 40, 50 episodes or so, what they used to do is they used to have episodes on topics. So, like some of the early episodes, they did a great episode on Pinochet where they did background research. They went through the story of Pinochet. They gave all kinds of interesting info. They would do episodes on like specific topics, like on Dindus, on high time preference. They did an episode where they talked a lot about what's his name, the current mayor of New York. They used to be a lot more focused, and I kind of found over time The Daily Show just got longer and longer and longer, to the point now where it's just like 4 hours of shit posting. And I kind of, when I stopped watching it, is I found every time someone tried to bring up a topic or was I trying to think about it again? Jolly Crocodile says, modern Daily Show isn't that bad. Okay, maybe it's gotten better again, because I remember I stopped listening to it just because it had gotten really just bad. Like, I found whenever someone was trying to talk about something interesting, they just call them an autist and shut it down and go back to shit posting. That kind of thing. But, yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts on TRS. It's just kind of a mess these days. It's sad. I'm sure eventually, like, it'll collapse and something better will take its place, but at the moment, they're kind of having an identity crisis. Let's see here. So I think that's all I really wanted to cover at the moment. So I might be on Beckloff's stream later tonight or another podcast. Just stay tuned, and I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good Saturday.